Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Cackings here again for another fantastic and exciting video. So today I was talking to some of my friends recently, and I had a really interesting conversation about drug addiction and specifically some of the treatment modalities that are good for treating drug addicts. And this one I found was really difficult, and I want to stress that by no means am I saying anything that is absolutely empirical and objective, but more so I'm going to be citing from the clinical literature as well as from my own experiences and knowledge studying in the field of psychology for a couple years now. So if I source anything wrong, please forgive me, but I'm going to do the best I can. I sort of wanted to put it out there, first of all, that I think the term drug addict or junkie, or even though we're going to be using the term drug addict for this video, I think we should understand that it does come with some weight. Specifically, it comes with shame and guilt for those who are using. So rather, I think a more reflective language of compassion and comfort may be good, but obviously this is going to vary heavily from individual to individual. So I think that that's the first step here, is that we understand there's individual treatments and the way we describe things. Because the biggest problem is when you're trying to get somebody into treatment in the first place, if you straight up tell them, hey, I think you're a junkie or something like that, obviously you wouldn't say that, but if you did, they're probably going to heavily deny it, because that implies that that has a negative implication along with it. So I want to sort of start off by listing a statistic first of all, and it's about that. Sorry, forgive me. Allergies are pretty bad in the winter. So the first one was that about 40 to 60% of addicts relapse. And I want to sort of start off by saying that's a positive statistic. And the reason I say that is because of this. Because in it, it has hope, and it means two things. So the first thing, of course, is going to mean that one, that addicts are trying to recover. And two, that addicts can and have beat their addiction. So the first step in all of this is to be careful when approaching and asking them. Although it's well intentioned, many people might just go up and ask if they're using. For a drug addict who spent their entire life hiding their addiction, the admittance of such often comes with a lot of shame. Instead, I would say I find a much more useful and practical approach is to say something like, hey, I've noticed some changes in your behavior, and I don't want to force you to talk about it, but I believe you may be using substances. I love you, which is why I'm saying this, and I just want you to know I'm here for you. You don't have to tell me what's going on. I just want you to know that if you need anything, I'm here to talk. I found that usually helps the most when trying to talk to somebody and open the door to conversation. And the other thing I found throughout the course of my life is that I've rarely, if ever, met a drug addict that is happy with life or their long-term substance use. So often we have to ask ourselves, what is more fulfilling than the use of the substance? For many users, they started and continue to use as a way to process trauma and cope with life. And forgive me if my guinea pigs are in the background. They jump around a lot, so forgive me for the noise. I'll actually show you guys them maybe next video, just so you can sort of see how they are. What was I saying? What was I at? Oh, yeah. So, for many users, that's just how they've learned to deal with trauma and cope. So if traumatic events happen, such as the loss of one's house and job, this will further increase the use exponentially. Which I think brings me on to, one of the biggest problems I find in how we handle drug addicts personally. And it's specifically nonviolent users, specifically those who are not traffickers. They got caught with a small amount. And our solution is to put them in jail or prison. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that this costs a substantial amount of money in the terms of taxpayer dollars. which could be better spent somewhere else. This also provides that there's overcrowding of jails oftentimes too. And without saying it, there are very many, specifically, not to make this a political thing by any means, and I don't want you to take it this way, but often in conservative states, whether this be causation, correlation, this have any real relativistic connection, it is stated that there's often harsher sentences in like places like Alabama, in which it's hard to keep all this knowledge in my head and know what I'm saying and where I'm going with this. What I was saying is, nonviolent drug users often can spend 10, 15, 20 years, if not more, inside for drug charges. And the problem here is that not only is a huge chunk of their life taken away from them, but inside of prisons, there's often no real time for building life skills or tools to help them. So that way, when they get out and they go out on the street again, they have meaningful employment. So you got to think about this, right? So now they have a record, they have a felony, and no real meaningful jobs will take them. So they have trouble finding a job anyways. But then, even if they do find a job, it's often a low-income job, which means they can't afford a nice neighborhood or a nice house. So they might have to go to Section 8 housing or go for low-income apartments in bad neighborhoods where the rate of crime is high. And being around that environment only serves to enable the same non-productive behavior as before. And let me just say this. Absolutely, for some, jail or prison is the way to go. But for others, it just doesn't work. Which is why the majority of people will reoffend within just 3 years after getting out. Think about that for a second. So, what I like to say is the behaviors, trauma, environment, etc., I think are never really properly addressed the way it should be. So, you could even go so far as to say, well, okay, while they're doing the jail sentence, we're going to make them see a therapist. They're going to see a therapist. But as the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So even if they're forced to be there in therapy, unless they're actively engaging in the betterment of themselves, it's kind of a waste of time for both the therapist and for the client, which can be particularly difficult because even if you implement stuff like cognitive behavioral therapies, again, unless they really want it, it's a waste of time. So I think the first step for somebody who's getting treatment, and this is said over and over again, but I really, 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 really like it, is that they have to want it more than anything else. So that's the first and most important step. Next is going to be getting them into a good drug rehabilitation program instead of prison or jail if possible. So what I like to look for anytime when you're looking at admitting a user into a drug rehabilitation program, I think some good signs of successful ones are going to be typically as follows. So they're going to be usually ones I run in partnership with former reformed convicts and addicts. So, and the reason I say this is because who better to ask for advice than people who have lived that life, who have had similar experiences, and who have overcome that. So, I think additionally, it's about accountability and patience when someone makes a mistake as well. So, progress is obviously not linear, and it's bound to be setbacks. So, we must prepare for those. And speaking of accountability, punishments must be given out for doing bad. But it could be something as simple as having them do extra dishes, etc. And on the opposite hand, rewarding people for doing good. It is so helpful and encouraging to be validated. We often see people go without being thanked, and this acts so discouraging for others when they feel like they're doing it for nothing. And it's also good motivation to know that people see you in your progress. Which we'll go into the next point relating to other people, which is support systems. And I think support systems are one of, if not the most important things that you can find in halfway houses. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the previous point of accountability. So the group members will typically, the reason this is so good is because group members act as a way to hold each other to a higher standard. And they can lift each other up when they're feeling down and celebrate when they're doing good. Addicts have been hearing their whole life how much of a fuck up they are and how drugs are going to ruin their life. And they already know all of this. Of course, keeping that in mind is important. But there's little use in telling somebody something they've heard 1,000 times. Instead, what I found to be helpful is positive goals and dreams, reminding them of those and how important they are. So I always like to start with a question of, why do you want to do this and what is your plan to accomplish it? Because I feel like it's really important to set out baby steps so they don't feel overwhelmed, and have them write down all their goals and what they can look forward to getting so they have it as a reminder whenever they're feeling weak. Indeed, I would say compassion is one of the more important traits as well in this. This is someone's brother, daughter, husband, wife, not some subhuman. And I understand that it can be easy to look and see them at their worst moments, but it's important to keep in mind this is not who they are. This is just a phase of their life. And if we were all judged based on our worst moments, many of us would not look so flattering. And back to the halfway houses and the sober houses, they're extremely effective in rehabilitation, especially if the users can learn a trade while there, so that way they will gain a purpose in meaningful employment that will help them come out of the slums and into a better, safer life. And last but not least, it's important to get them away from those negative friends and their drug or drugs of choice. For many, the thought of giving these things up is like the death of a loved one in terms of grief. They have grown so accustomed to this life. Even if it's a life of suffering, it's familiar. And the uncertainty of change can be absolutely debilitating for many of them. Questions like, where will I go? What will I do? Are just a few of many. So, I guess what I'm saying is it's about replacing these things with something even better, whatever it may be. Which is why, back to the previous point, it's important to ask them, what do they feel like they're missing? There was a wonderful study in Rat Park in which they had these rats that, when properly equipped with food, water, other rats, and everything they needed or could want as a rat, they didn't use the drug-laced water. Even rats who were addicted and then brought from isolation to Rat Park beat their addiction. And even for the rats who did use, none of them overdosed. In stark contrast to the rats who were isolated, when they were introduced to the drug-laced water, they often overdosed many, many times. Which speaks to the level of isolation and a lack of support system what it can do on rats and on humans. And then, to that point, there's one more study I'd like to cite that I think you'll find is very, very helpful and cool, and I would love if you would look up as well. And this is another study of rats, of course. We love, in the field of psychology, we love our rats. We really love our rats. So this one was a study in which rats were out in water. They were placed in water, and they were swimming until they were about to drown. And many of the rats did not last that long at all. But upon the moment they were about to go under the water, they would be pulled out. So then, the rats would be put back in. And what was marvelous was that these rats ended up swimming for hours and would just keep swimming and swimming and swimming. Way longer than they initially did upon being first placed and submerged in the water. And so it's theorized that they did so because somewhere, somehow, they then knew that there was hope that they would be rescued again. Isn't it amazing what a little bit of help can do? A little bit of hope? Anyways, thank you all for listening. This is Cow King signing off. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions or comments down below. And again, I said it before, but I'm not an expert in this field. I'm not a professional. I highly recommend seeing a professional, somebody who is licensed to practice, because I'm none of that. So I'm just a dude who really loves psychology, went to university for it. That's it. See a professional. Make sure you get the help you need and a good support system. And thanks for watching. Appreciate it, guys.